Welcome back. This is your 3416 research review, and I'm now going to speak about the qualitative designs in greater detail. So, qualitative designs, of course, review from last year. The nature of reality is that it's socially constructed. There's more than one possible reality. It's a lot of in the eye of the beholder. Parts are interrelated. Variables depend on each other, but don't be confused by that word variable in the sense that we're not measuring mathematically. That there's a lot of context that it is involved as human beings in our conversations and interactions with each other. The context can't be really separated from the reality and subjective experience. Qualitative researchers are very much interested in the subjective data and the holistic view. That's probably cut off at the bottom of your slide there. Oops. The root source of knowledge for the three that we talk about a lot in class: anthropology, social psychology, and philosophy. The idea of intuition and the school of Gestalt, i.e. the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Social interactions, values, and culture are part of the qualitative tradition. The research is very much process-oriented, interested in complex phenomena, and person-oriented. Now, coming back to the sampling conversation, remember that in the qualitative realm you may see any of the previously mentioned sampling strategies. An additional sampling strategy that you see typically with grounded theory is that of theoretical sampling. Theoretical sampling we'll come to in a minute. So, purpose of sampling, again, very common in this paradigm, sometimes seen in the quantitative paradigm. The researcher uses knowledge about the population and its particular elements to hand-pick cases. The researcher selects subjects who are considered typical of the population, as opposed to sticking up a sign, first come, first serve, which may not get typical participants. The researcher does assume that errors in judgment are made, overrepresenting or underrepresenting certain elements, but that they would balance out, and acknowledges that there is a possibility of bias. Snowball sampling, once again, difficult samples, impossible to locate, taking advantage of social networks, and people have characteristics in common. You identify one member, excuse me for 1 second. You identify one member of the group and have them help you identify other members. And that's therefore your sample snowballs. The example I gave in class, I believe, is homeless people or drug abusers, sex trade workers, people who are not likely going to be easy to capture in any other way. Theoretical sampling is used in grounded theory. I won't say exclusively because, never say never. But the idea is you start with a purposive sample in grounded theory or a convenience sample. And as you start to see things come out of the data, you're analyzing the data concurrently in grounded theory, what you do then is you go after someone else to talk more about the hunches. Okay, so you keep records, you keep field notes, and as things start to emerge, you say to yourself, well, I wonder if that issue is important that particular participant mentioned, and you try to find another participant who could speak to that issue. So I think the example I gave in class was if somebody, for example, has a chronic illness and they're talking about challenges related to their chronic illness, and they mention the challenge of being employed and chronically ill, then you may have planned to interview several more retired people, but you'll actually switch your sampling strategy to have some other people who could speak to that employment issue so that you can fully saturate that category. So that's called theoretical sampling. Qualitative data, we know, tends to be in the form of interviews, usually one-on-one or focus group, but certain designs also include some observations. some analysis of writing, some immersing in the setting and being a fly on the wall. Data analysis in the qualitative paradigm consists usually of transcribing word for word the interviews and or videotapes, and constantly comparing. The field notes and theoretical memos are added to the transcriptions, and over time the researcher develops meaning of the phenomenon. That does tend to vary depending on the main three designs, which we will talk about as we go here. The first one being grounded theory. For all of these three designs, you have narrative, i.e. data, and you have context details that are included in the report. The analysis goes back and forth, and it does happen simultaneously with the data collection. So rather than doing all the interviews and then sitting down to analyze all the transcripts, you're actually doing analysis of each interview as it comes in and then going back and forth. The product varies from design to design, and we're going to discuss these in turn. So grounded theory, the purpose is to inductively develop a theory based on observations, i.e. based on your study. When you think about your textbook, when you look at your textbook, grounded theory is very close to a quantitative method. Although there is qualitative interviews and things like that make it definitely a qualitative design choice, when you think it's very close, it's very next to quantitative methods, as opposed to phenomenology, which would be much more into the world of perception. You do analysis and observation in grounded theory, the constant comparative analysis, which generates codes, and then they're clustered into categories. The ultimate goal is to see relationships between the categories and develop an actual theory, which may end up being a diagram. Right? And as you go, you continue to fill each category until it's saturated. What you're hoping to have is some explanation of the entire phenomena that is grounded in the data, right? And there is some recognition that natural laws drive reality, and that's why I say it's close to being a received view. The Glaser, Strauss, and some others, but typically Glaser and Strauss are the fathers of grounded theory. The philosophy underpinning grounded theory is known as symbolic interactionalism. You have typically constant comparison mentioned. There are 3 levels of codes usually for a typical grounded theory study, each one getting more and more in depth. You see theoretical sampling as previously described, and the goal is to uncover the basic social process, or to make a complete description of what is going on here. Okay, so I described how it's often in the title as an ing thing. So an example of a grounded theory study might be something like, what is the process of surviving, there's my ing, right, a natural disaster? How do people go from the initial experience of the disaster to a year out? What's the process? And if you did a study and you talk to people, ultimately you probably will label your process something like reclaiming the old me, or the new normal, or I don't know, I'm making up examples here, but the idea is you develop a theory about what is going on. Some of our well-known theories in nursing stemmed from grounded theory studies. Now, the next design choice I'd like to explain is ethnography, or I should say review. Ethnography is a qualitative choice where you're really examining models of cognition or ways of thinking or patterns of behavior for people within a culture, and consider that the word culture needs to be almost in quotations, because it's not always ethnic, right? It can be a culture of people that have common ground for some other reason, such as homelessness or ICU nurses or sex trade workers or nursing students. You're looking at context is very important, the context of the problems. Ethnographic studies have great details about what else is going on, what the unit looks like, or what the place looks like, so that you can see, almost see the setting. You're also looking at how groups construct and understand a specific. You may also be looking at how a group understands a health or illness experience. What you're seeking here, again, I'm sorry my screencast cuts off the bottom of my slide, but you're trying to understand the EMIC, E-M-I-C, or native's perspective, the insider's view of the phenomenon. The underlying values is that culture is fundamental to ethnographic research, that it's behavioral and cognitive perspectives. You're trying to uncover the beliefs, the knowledge, and the ideas that people use as they live through something. And culture provides the structure. Once again, context is very important. You have to be a fly on the wall for ethnographic. It's from the anthropology tradition of studying peoples, right? And it's face-to-face contact and immersing yourself in the setting, hanging around till people start behaving just as they always would, even if you were not there. So it's very important that it be in a natural setting. You're not bringing them into a center to talk to them. They're doing their thing wherever it is that they live or work or play. The aim is to uncover the EMIC perspective, the insider view, and to combine it with the researcher's perspective, which is often an outsider's view, to develop a generalization about the society or culture. The roots of ethnography come from anthropology. Spradley is a name that you'll commonly see in the late 70s. Because you are observing, I always say, picture yourself bird watching or being a fly on the wall. You do take field notes about what you see the participants doing, and so that you can recreate the actual scene for the reader and also for yourself when you're analyzing. The goal is to have a theoretical description of the culture. Okay, ultimately taking the initial raw data and creating some sort of a description of the culture that explains the entire culture. Again, careful with the word culture. Phenomenology being the most sort of extreme, sometimes the most difficult to understand. All qualitative research is trying to answer questions of meaning, but phenomenology is really trying to understand the experience, the in-depth piece of an experience or a phenomenon from those who have experienced it. So the lived experience, i.e., what was it like going through this? It's a useful method when it's a new topic or something needs to be a fresh perspective to examine it. There's several phenomenological schools. A general descriptive phenomenology is tied to Husserl. Interpretive is Heidegger, and both is considered hermeneutical. You don't need to memorize those terms, just in case you come across them somewhere. These philosophers, basically this comes from the school of philosophy, and the idea is there are multiple methods, and there are in-depth multiple interviews with generally a small number of people. Phenomenology studies tend to be the smallest of all the qualitative studies. And the purpose of phenomenology is to uncover the essence of the phenomenon, or the aha moment, or the central meaning of the phenomenon. There are 5 concepts in phenomenology. I've only got another minute, so I'll go fairly quickly through them. But again, the goal being to understand meanings, and the whole idea came about because positivism was not working well for human studies, and the objective of the study is the lived world or the lived experience. Bracketing is very important in phenomenology, which is setting aside your prejudices, and the idea of intersubjectivity, that we all share a common world, and that we all have a body in space and time, and that this intersubjectivity is important. We cannot separate ourselves from the process. Credibility, audibility, and fittingness we will come back to in another video. Oh, I can't ask questions in this, but that's my questions.